Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Find a Moment podcast, where we navigate the space between ideals and everyday life. We are your hosts, Gretchen Roberts and Jennifer Ford, and we look forward to finding a moment with you today. Hello, friends, and welcome. We're beginning a new series on identity, and today will be part one, where we're going to discuss understanding who we are so we can love others well. Before we jump in, I would like to share that we would love to hear your feedback. We would love to hear ideas on topics or any feedback that you have for us about the Find a Moment podcast. So if you go to findamoment.buzzsprout.com, which is our web host, you can send a text message. So at the bottom of the episode, it'll say send a text, and you can send us a text and let us know any feedback you have or ideas, comments about the last episode or this episode. We would just love to hear from you. So we're going to jump into talking about identity today. And Jennifer, would you like to share a bit about kind of the thought behind this new series and what identity means to us?
Sure. So when we've just been discussing and just kind of sorting through our thoughts about the series, one of the things that we kept landing on was being a student of ourselves. And as we develop our identity, how are the ways that we reveal who we are and what is truth? Where are we defining ourselves? And backing up just a tiny bit, when we talk about ideals, as we go through the podcast, you'll hear that word a lot because we are navigating the space between our ideals and everyday life. Just backing up to ideals, we just have to talk for a second about how we develop those. Is that intentional, or are we developing ideals subconsciously? And the ideals that we develop about ourselves, we have to be careful what we allow to influence that. And so with identity, we're thinking, what is our identity, but also what is it not? And I was thinking too, a lot of times for identity, we define ourselves by what we do. But I also want to look at that kind of as opposed to who we are. Those are not the same things. And we probably have all had experiences with people who have gone through an identity crisis at some time or another, whether they've lost a job or they were an athlete with a severe injury that kind of changed how they saw themselves and what they were able to do. But being a student of ourselves is one of the things that we're going to focus on today, and what's required for us to do that well. So I think that will start us off.
That is so great. And I think realizing that we are all students of ourselves. We all need to be students of ourselves. We need to have that space for reflection, introspection. And the beautiful thing too is I don't think it's ever too late to be a student of yourself and to figure out who you are. And from the basic things of like your personality, your preferences, the way you give and receive love, the way you feel loved, the ways that you enjoy expressing love to others, and what are your strengths, and all those kind of things. It's never too late, I don't think, to contemplate and to consider who you are.
Yeah, I love that. What are some of the specific tools that have helped you understand yourself and maybe others too?
Sure. I think it started out, one of the first things I did back in medical school days, we all had to do the Myers-Briggs personality
Yes.
test. And I think I was off the charts on the E and the F. So the extrovert and the feeling. um, so that was kind of really one of my first experiences with really like understanding the different personalities. And maybe that is a common fault of extroverts. We think everybody wants to talk all the time, right? Um, so that was kind of the beginnings for me. And then, I started reading more about love languages and the Enneagram and strength finders. And, I don't think any one of those things is kind of the end all be all. I think
Mhm.
it's kind of taking in that information about yourself and reflecting about yourself as far as what your tendencies are and what your um, it can even be little preferences, but that can end up having a big impact in your relationships if you haven't considered them. Um, so that was kind of the place where I started really reflecting um, and understanding more of who I was. And a lot of it was out of necessity because a lot of the people in my life, whether it was my husband or children, had very different personalities than
Mm.
me.
Mhm.
And really wanting to understand them, I realized I have to understand who I am even before I can understand who they are and be able to love them well. Um, and then I think it kind of led to in the past 5 years or so, I've gone kind of a step further with really defining my ideals and developing my own personal, what they call a rule of life, which is based on the rule of Saint Benedict, where you kind of look at these different areas of your life and you have a rule, not as in a do this, don't do that, but a rule as in like a measuring stick. So it was a way to really clarify my ideals in a lot of areas about myself and relationships and my home and my spirit and my mind and all of those kind of things. So it's been definitely a journey, and that's why I said I don't think it's ever too late because you will never finish
Right.
this task
Right.
of self-reflection and really being honest with yourself. What does it look like for you, Jennifer, in how you've been a student of yourself?
I I think just and we talked about this in the first episode, just being curious
Mhm.
has lent itself well to me just being a student of myself, just being interested. I have used all of the pretty much everything that you just mentioned, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, Strengths Finder. I have not done the Rule of Life. Every time you talk about it, I think, oh my goodness, that sounds like something that would really be valuable, and also a lot of work. Uh,
Yes.
um, I but each piece of those, there's definitely been things where I have had moments where I realize this isn't that there's friction because something is wrong in my relationships. This is just because we're different.
Yes.
And being able to kind of release the expectations that I've had on others has helped me to not have a spirit of disappointment, but help me be more understanding. And also, I think with some of these, like with the Enneagram, you're not supposed to type the people in your life, but it can also help you kind of realize we all are motivated by different things, for example, or we all process things through a lens of, whether we're an extrovert or an introvert. In our family, for my birthday, I had everybody get their laptops out and I made everybody take the Myers-Briggs test
Oh, I love it.
at the same time, and it turned out that we all had the same three last letters.
Wow.
Two of us tested as introverts and two of us tested as extroverts. And I kind of felt disappointed because I was like, this is boring. But at the same time, like I also know that that's not the only thing about us that's unique. Like we all have
Right.
different enneagrams, we all have different strengths. But the Strengths Finder is the most recent one that I've done, and that was very valuable for me. My top five were belief, ideation, connectedness, arranger, and learner. And that learner,
Mm.
that's that curiosity, that having that investigative spirit. But I just had kind of made a note with some traits that I feel like we need to develop in ourselves to be a student of ourselves. And that's um, having a spirit of curiosity, being comfortable with investigating things, having attentiveness, resourcefulness. Um, Relationships are also something that can help us be a student of ourselves if those relationships are healthy and those people can speak truth to us. You
Mhm.
also have to have some grit to be a student of yourselves because you're going to come across things that you don't like. And so grit helps you stay engaged and to not just kind of turn a blind eye to those things in yourself, but instead you decide to dig in and do some work. It requires a lot of humility. to
Mhm.
steady yourself, because just like with the grit, you're going to find things that you don't love, that are just God's way of saying, I'm sanctifying you, I'm refining you, you are not done yet. And then vision, you have to have some vision for that journey, because um, there's always going to be something else to learn, and different seasons of your life are going to shape you. And so who I am today is not who I'm going to be in 10 years when my kids are grown and gone.
Right.
um, what do you think are some of the traits about yourself that have lent themselves to your journey of just understanding who you are and who
Mhm.
God's made you to be?
Um, I think realizing that that I historically have been, like I said, I was off the charts extrovert, but realizing as I've grown
Mm,
that I am not as extroverted
mm,
as I probably was
mhm,
20 years ago. Um, and realizing that the people in my life are, like I said, different personalities. And I think being on that journey with other people is so important.
mm,
And because we can get into our head a lot when we
mhm,
are kind of learning about ourselves. And it's one of the things I've loved with our friendship as we've been able to kind of go through this process together is to share that with each other and to see that, okay, there are things that I see in myself that are hard, and then you can see it in me and see it in a different way and
mm,
speak into me in a
mm.
different way through that. And that has been really neat to kind of discuss these kind of things together. And I think a lot of this journey between the two of us and our personalities has just been out of like sheer necessity of us being like,
Absolutely.
we want to love the people in our lives better and
Mhm,
we want to have healthy relationships with other people. And how do we do this?
mhm,
And so it's been really a gift to go through this together and to share things because I had read about Clifton's strengths probably years ago, and then you recently
mhm,
went through it again and you were asking me about my strengths and things. So to have someone to kind of bounce these things off and
mhm,
it really makes it feel less daunting
mhm,
and just makes it feel more like you're growing together
mhm,
and you're really learning more. Um, and also learning with my personality of, if you're familiar with Enneagram, I'm kind of an Enneagram 1, 2. And sometimes I'm a 1 wing 2, sometimes I'm a 2 wing 1, depending on
mhm,
the season, but it's very similar. Um, but so much of historically my personality things have been very black and white. And, this sense of like right and wrong and justice and uh, that doesn't really allow a lot of grace for others when that's your personality. And so realizing like, okay, not everyone feels as strongly as I do
mm,
about these things that to me are black and white, but to a lot of other people, they're not.
mhm,
And so that was a hard thing to learn, but it's been really good to learn.
mm.
And like you said, it releases people from expectations
Yeah,
that they do not need to have on them that we can put on them. So that was a big lesson that I've learned through understanding myself a little better.
that's so good. That you're talking about seeing things really black and white, and I definitely find myself, um, as I have gotten older, being able to shed that a little bit more.
Hmm.
Like there's different, there's some things that will always be black and white, but then there's other things just in relationships and parenthood and ministry and just life, things that will never be black and white. And I think God does big work in that gray area. I think there's a
Hmm.
lot of grace in the gray, because you can't control other people's choices and perspectives and behaviors, which requires you to, if you're going to stay healthy in that, it requires you to learn to give grace and to try and understand, um, and even understanding that there are things that you don't understand. even just having
Mhm.
that sense of awareness, like, I don't know why my child is doing this, but they're obviously struggling. That enables me to give grace. I still don't understand why, but I understand that there's something I still don't know, and I love this person. I'm going to love them in with grace in that gray area. I think there's a lot of I think a lot of times we think that we're supposed to get from point A to point B, but there's so much that's happening in that place of the traveling between those two things. And I think that's where God does some major work in us, because we have to rely on Him. We have to have patience and faith and forbearance
Yeah.
in those spaces. And in some ways, I think those spaces are more refining and more transformative than when we get to where we think we're supposed to be. We're so what's the word, like, destination focused,
Yes,
and
yes.
we forget that traveling is where a lot of sanctifying takes place. We're so eager to get to the we just want to be done, we want to arrive.
Right,
I think there's value to that, and that helps us to have patience, helps us to slow down when we're before we've you know reached that, before the goal has been met, or before the behavior has resolved, or whatever that is, or before the conflict has been made peaceful. It helps us to slow down and realize, like, the Lord's probably doing something right here in me.
right,
I probably need to I probably need to attend to myself and my heart and see, what is the Lord speaking to me right now.
right. So, in talking about ideals and as it relates to being a student of ourselves, I think I can realize this ideal of God made us unique. He made us in his image. There's no one else like you. He made you for a purpose. And I think that we can have that as our ideal, or at least, I can think that, but then practically how that lives out. Personally, I think like you were talking about just this introspection and this more of like it's a spiritual transformation, I think, that happens over time with prayer and journaling and reading the word and going using all these resources and things. And I think a lot of it gets back to identity along how it's so coupled with value.
Mm,
And I think that as a woman, or any human, that we tie a lot of our value and our worth into what we see as our identity. So, whether you are, a successful business person or a successful physician or attorney or businessman or any of the things, you can have your identity in that, and so often our value and our worth is tied into
mm,
that. And I think as moms, it can definitely be tied into our value and our worth is how well our children are doing
mhm,
and how great they are and all these wonderful accolades, and that can really lead to us finding our own personal worth and
mhm,
value and identity in things that were never made to
mhm.
bear the weight of our identity,
Right.
and that can sustain our identity. And so, for me, I think a lot of what had to happen was just realizing who I am outside of all the external and finding out and feeling it, not only feeling it, but believing it to my core that my value is in being a child of God.
Mm,
And nothing can take that away. And no career can give me that. No perfect child can give me that, or perfect marriage, or those things aren't even reality.
right. Right.
And so in thinking about our ideal and our everyday life, I think finding that place of value and worth that is from something beyond what any of those external things can provide.
hmm Um, when I was preparing for this, I had made a note, about the verse Ephesians 2:10 that says that we're God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that He prepared in advance for us. And this is, emphasizing the fact that we are very carefully and uniquely designed to do the things that God has planned for us. And that does include things that we do. We do good deeds. We love and serve others. We make choices about our careers, our education, our vocation, our ministry, but that's still not who we are.
Right.
And being able to discern the difference between those is really important. Otherwise, you're not going to have a healthy sense of self. If you know if there's trauma or a major loss, or if things just change in your life for reasons that you can't control,
Mm.
um, as iron sharpens iron, one person sharpens another. That's from Proverbs, and that's a big part of how I feel like our relationship has been able to grow over the years.
Mhm.
Us just giving and receiving permission to be honest with one another. And a big part of letting go of who you are, based on what you do, is being willing to be open to things that maybe you're not even aware of. So what is it that the people in my life what can they see about me that I'm not able to see? I have blind spots, and I only have a point of view. It's a point. I don't have
Right.
the full perspective. I have a point of view. I need people around me to speak truth to me. The hard part is sometimes that's uncomfortable, and it requires humility for us to be open to that. There's
Right.
going to be things that other people can easily call out in us, that or share with us in a spirit of love, that we just otherwise would not have access to. And I mean, that's just authentic relationship, right?
Right.
That's just living in community, based on truth and love. But even having my value tied up in what I do for ministry, or um, who are my friends, or what neighborhood do I live in, or what math are my kids in. My kids are doing
Right.
this in this grade. It can be so easy to allow yourself to, and that doesn't mean you can't be proud of your kids and that you don't
Right.
brag on them. To you know there's a time and a place for those things, but that's not your value, and that's not your
Right.
identity, because those things could change. And what does that say about your friend whose child is not doing those things? Do
Right.
you see them any differently? But for some reason, we put that on ourselves, because there's something in us that we feel like we need to fill
Mhm.
with, like you said, the external things.
For me, one of the I think the biggest steps of in this process was learning to surrender the things that I hold on to for my value and identity. And, I talked about just allowing God to be the one who defines us and who gives us our worth and our value and says that we are valuable
Mm,
and that we matter and that we're made for a purpose. And being able to believe that to our core,
mm,
I think takes a level of surrendering all of those things. And I think that ties in with what you were saying too about just having the humility to receive
mm,
feedback from others and things like that. And I think having the humility to lay it all down. And sometimes um, we we get to that place because our circumstances are so shattered that we are left feeling empty-handed, and so we just are there to surrender. And then there are other times I think we have to really actively lay down those things and surrender those things. Years ago, I went to medical school and did a pediatric residency and was a pediatrician for a time. And I still keep up with, CME and license and all that kind of stuff. But, years ago, that was a kind of defining thing for me. And I felt that when I was in medical school, that I would finally kind of feel like I've reached the mountaintop, and this is my identity, and I've found my purpose. And it was not the mountaintop experience that I expected. It was just kind of another step. You do high school, you go to college, it really felt like just the next step. And so navigating that very weird, difficult space was what led me to begin that process of surrendering the things that I hold on to for value and my identity. Um, and realizing that no matter what I'm doing, whether it's my career, or motherhood or somewhere in between, that God is the one that defines me and that gives me my value. And so it when I became a mother and I had multiple children and I'm home full time, and then I decide to homeschool them, and I found myself easily falling into that. Motherhood is defining me, and
Mm.
motherhood is giving me my value and my purpose. And so realizing again, like I have to surrender these titles and these roles and allow God to meet me there and to give me my sense of value, because otherwise, those external things
Mm.
um, can lead us to feeling a sense of failure. And so, being able to navigate the space between that ideal of what I see motherhood to be and in the everyday life, there has to be something that can bear the weight of that everyday life. Um, so for me, it was really learning to surrender those things. And, in Psalm 139, it says, search my heart,
Mm.
Lord, and I think I come back to that thought and that posture a lot, for God to search our heart and to refine us and to see, is there any way in me that is looking to this to make me feel worthy or valued? Um, what about you, Jennifer? Are there things that you have had to surrender, or kind of identities, or kind of that surrender process for you? What does that look like?
I think probably most recently, transitioning away from homeschooling. Both of
Mhm.
our girls will be doing different things starting this fall, for school, and so this is the first time in 11 years that I will not be a homeschool mom. And I have a degree in education. That was something that I pursued long before I had a family and kids of our own. And so education is just something that I've always been passionate about. And so then really leaning into homeschooling for so long and being really connected in our homeschool community here,
Mhm.
um, that has been just such a transformative part of my life for a very long time. But it is not who I am. If it is something that can shift and change, that is not my identity. And so feeling feeling torn, but about that change coming, it does feel like I'm shedding part of myself. That doesn't nullify the years that we did homeschool, and it doesn't devalue my contribution to our kids and our family and their education. Um, but it does feel like there's a part of me that is um, I don't know, kind of coming to a close. And
Mhm.
that's where I just have to tell myself that's something that I have done. And yes, it was my purpose, and yes, it had value, but that's not the same as who I am.
Right.
Those are not the same things. There's I was also in my notes for prepping for today. One of the things that I wrote was that there's an overlapping of like what I believe about myself, and then what is it that others believe about me, and then
Mm.
what does the world say, because the world will always have something to say, and then what does God say about me. And there's
Mm.
only one of those things that is absolutely true. And our task as we move through life, as we change from season to season and stage to stage, um, one of our great tasks is to sift and sort and seek with discernment, who am I and what is truth, and making sure that we are keeping that exclusive from the things that we do, the people who we're with, the place
Yes.
where we live, the car that we drive, the private school that our kids attend. Those are not those are not things that are tied up in our identity. And the space between is, you know, the space between like our ideals and then everyday life. It's we're not always living how we are called to live. Like our ideal is righteousness.
Mhm.
And the space between is like striving for righteousness, but also finding ourselves really struggling at times, whether I've yelled at my kids or slammed the door or, um, really neglected a conversation that needed to happen.
Mm.
That space between, that's going to be a place where the enemy's going to be really tempted to tell us that we're failing.
Yes.
But God says, I'm refining you. And when we are having to kind of refine and sift, that's that sanctifying season where God says, these things that you do, these places that you go, these interactions, these tasks that I have, your purpose, that is not who you are. That is not your identity. And that's something that for myself, I have to continually revisit that.
So good.
Mm,
And I think hearing you share all that there, once you get to a place where you feel your value and your worth in your heart and in your mind from the Lord, there it takes you to such a place of freedom,
mm,
because in that freedom of
mhm.
knowing that you're not looking to other things to meet those needs, that there's a freedom to enjoy those things,
Yes.
and there's a freedom to enjoy those relationships, and enjoy motherhood, and it
Mhm,
leads to just a level of freedom that I did not know was possible before
mm.
that. um, so, as we kind of close today in our first discussion on identity, what would you want to encourage those who are listening with today? What would you want to kind of like any homework?
Homework. Yes. So I would just encourage listeners to have a mindfulness to the way that God, I want you to ask yourself, how has God equipped me uniquely? Because He has. And
Mhm.
if we believe that, we're just going to operate under that assumption. If God has equipped you and created you uniquely, and He has called you to a unique purpose, and He has given you a unique design, then what does that mean about how you see yourself as you encounter challenges, as you live into your purpose, but also as you're just considering your identity? So when you understand your uniqueness, you realize that God has not called anybody else to live out the purpose and to live out the life that He has called you to. And that can give you confidence. God does not give everybody the same skills and the same design and purpose, because He is a God who loves variety, and I'm grateful for that. But I would say to take time, find a way to find a moment. There we
There
are.
you go.
Find a moment to consider what is your unique design that God has given you as a gift, and to remember that you do not possess the skills that everyone else possesses, but you are equipped for what the Lord sees fit to bring your way. He has equipped you for everything that He will bring you to. And finding a moment to connect with others in a way that is going to be meaningful to your identity, giving others permission to speak truth to you as iron sharpens iron, speaking the truth in love, um, but being mindful that taking time to surrender maybe the things that you gravitate towards that are going to distract you, like your phone, like the
Mm,
computer, like the TV. Finding a moment to put those things aside and to be intentional about hearing from the Lord. Who has He called you to be? Who does He say you are? Mining for that truth, being intentional about stillness, and just um, giving yourself some space to reflect on who He has called you to be. Um, Hearing the voice of the Holy Spirit. He is faithful to speak, but we so often are quick to busy our minds and our spirits with things that are going
mm.
to drown that out. So find a way to hear from the Lord about what He says about you and your identity.
That is so beautiful and so well said. We will also be sharing um, in our show notes blog post section, we all the books and things that we mentioned today. I know we talked about a lot of resources just practically that both of us have used over the years, and so we will link to some wonderful books that have helped us to understand unique personalities, Enneagram, Clifton
Mm.
strengths, introvert, extrovert, all those things. So we will link to all of those for you also. So we look forward to hearing from you. Be sure and send us a message through our Buzzsprout link and let us know what you would like to hear. And also let us know if you have any thoughts or feedback or questions about today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to sharing more with you about identity next week when we will discuss part 2, from toddlers to teens, understanding who our children are so we can love them well.